Meet your host, Jo Grove-Lafarge. Joining us today are our guests, Alison Crockford and Helen Lipscombe.
Hello and welcome to The Prepared Leader from Crisis to Confidence, the monthly podcast for leaders who know that tough times aren't a matter of if, but when. I'm Jo Grove-Lafarge. Each month we will bring you bold strategies, real-world stories and powerful insights to help you lead stronger, smarter and with unstoppable confidence. Today we've got not just one but two special guests lined up, and we're going to explore culture. How do you do yours? The first guest today is Alison Crockford. Alison, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Alison Crockford. I'm the founder of a cyber and information security consultancy called Build Secure Thinking. I've worked in that industry for the last 10 years, doing everything from security, awareness and education through governance, risk, resilience and compliance.
Helen, would you like to introduce yourself as a guest to your show?
Hi everyone, I'm Helen Lipscombe. I am an owner of a resilience consultancy. I set up a couple of years ago, having worked in the resilience industry for over 20 years. Most of the work I do at this stage is helping organisations prepare for business disruptions and training individuals that are new to industry or partway through their career in terms of how they can develop their expertise, how they can apply different skills and build their knowledge around all elements of business continuity, resilience, crisis management.
Thank you, Helen. Welcome to your show. Now, the first question I have is a really lovely one. Could you both give me the definition of culture? Whoever wants to go first.
Sure, culture. I mean, I'm assuming we're talking about business culture here. So I would define organisational culture as the way that things get done around here, what the accepted norms are for the particular group of people you're with, the organisation that you work in, the team that you work in. Every organisation has its own different flavour. I actually did a master's in organisational behaviour, so this is very much in my wheelhouse. It's how things get done. It's what happens when nobody's watching. It's the way that people keep each other accountable when no one's telling them exactly what to do, even in very high compliance or regulated organisations.
Thank you, Alison. I think just building on that, it's all of that. Exactly those words came to mind as you asked that question. It's how organisations work, how things are done. It's the values that drive the organisation. That's often what's attributed to culture. It's what we're all aligned behind and the behaviours that leaders set out in terms of what the expectations are, how we want you to work, how we want you to work together, building on everything else. It's like a lot of it is around that, and a lot of it is around just, I guess, understanding that, I suppose, is the bit that's really important about culture, because we do talk a lot about culture. It's a word that you hear lots of organisations talk about, whether they are striving to change, improve, understand it. Part of it is coming back to what do you mean by culture, and do you know what you're trying to change?
And the bit around leadership as well. The best organisational cultures are ones where the leadership walk the walk and talk the talk, where people all over the organisation, whatever level they happen to be at, know that it's not just lip service, that the things leadership say are the things they'll actually do. I did hear one definition once which made me pause a little bit. So if you want a psychologically safe work culture, it's as safe as the lowest behaviour that you'll tolerate, as safe as the least good behaviour that you'll tolerate in your organisation, which I thought was an interesting way of looking at it.
That's really interesting. Yes. Yeah, because again, that sort of is that element of what do we see at the very basic level? What will we accept? Then it comes back to risk management. That's where risk comes into this conversation, because where do we accept risk and how is that influencing our behaviours, decisions and attitudes, which is that wider conversation around the relationship between all these different elements. You can't just look at culture in isolation. Culture is the way we do things, but culture is influenced by what does leadership say? How do we perceive risk? What do we allow in what authorities and do we allow different people to do?
Even beyond that, there's this one of my favourite sort of theorems for this is, I think it's Johnson and Scholl's cultural web. It talks about the influence of the country that you happen to be in, the industry that you're working in. People that work in electric vehicle delivery have a very different concept of what's acceptable to those that work in a bank, for example. The cultural norms, whether it's a male-dominated or female-dominated organisation, will change the cultural norms. But there are lots of things external to the company that will influence an organisational culture, whether we like that or not. Changes of leadership will also always have a profound effect on an organisational culture, depending on whether they dive into the one that exists or they strive to change it, which they often do.
That's what I often talk to people about when you're trying to set organisations up to implement different programs. You have to work with what leadership are setting out, but also recognise that is a moment in time. And it doesn't take a lot for that to change. It doesn't even have to be a senior leader changing. It could be anyone at any level changing will have an impact on how that program is seen and how that program is being viewed in the organisation. And that's what we're often trying to work within and work with.
So are you saying that it's more a person with influence rather than necessarily the most senior leader that can impact the culture? And have you got examples that you could share that you can think of off the top of your head? Putting you on the spot, both of you. While you're thinking, I think that it can be, this links in with the psychological safety comment that we made about the worst form of behaviour is the level that you're at, and that's the influential person. It's the other way around as well. So a more positive spin can be someone.
I did have an organisation where security and risk were part of the same overall function. A medium senior level person came in and those functions were split so that the two teams no longer work together. It just makes it more adversarial. It's not necessarily a good or bad decision. It's just that you have to change how you're seen. Security, privacy and risk being part of the same organisation can be a real positive, but there's also value in having them separated to enable them to be a challenge function, depending on the organisation. Sometimes you want risk to be able to challenge security or privacy, data protection on their decision making. It always causes a reshuffling of how things get done and how you feel about your colleagues when you're part of one team versus being separated, and in reverse as well. When teams, sometimes I think that's more disruptive than teams being separated, because you then have to merge two different subcultures, team cultures, into a single one, and that can be quite disruptive.
Yeah, and I think that point you just said there, Alison, really prompts, and it's a very well-known example of what happened at Boeing. Boeing culture.
That's topical.
Dramatic, and continue to be very topical 5-6 years on to when this first started, or even longer. I was recently talking about this with some students, and exactly that point of how cultures suddenly change when you get mergers. It can be just team mergers or much bigger organizational mergers. People, that obviously changed their safety culture in that case, and changed the ability to challenge, the ability to call out where they felt there were problems.
Do you want to explain that a bit more for people that are listening or watching that don't know what the Boeing scenario is?
So it was basically a merger of two organisations, and I'm trying to remember the second organisation. I think it was McDonald's. So those two organisations merged and had very different views on risk culture. I think if we separate out the elements, they did have. So those two companies merged. And what has been, I guess, evidence since that, and if we go back to the grounding of the 737, the Boeing Max, and then recent continued issues that Boeing are having with their culture. Alongside that, they've had lots of whistleblowers reporting very publicly what was previously an organisation that was very engaged in terms of being able to challenge, call out when things aren't going wrong, not going well, being able to, I guess, everyone in the organisation feeling like it was their role to make this organisation the best from a safety perspective. That all changed with this merger. And it's a very good example of how quickly this change can happen. Organisations and leaders don't really understand what was good and what was different within that organisation, and
keep the good without sacrifice. Without sacrificing it for the sake of change.
I think part of that comes back to the fact that I don't think a lot of leaders know what the culture is, or what we mean by that. And they don't recognise the positives until it's no longer there.
I think that's where that whole phrase culture eats strategy for breakfast comes from, isn't it? The idea that leadership may have a great plan, but it doesn't stand up to challenge from the real world and how things happen outside of the boardroom.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good example. And the other one that was coming to mind before that is probably just more tactical, having gone into organizations so many times and tried to implement programs across an organization. You always find it's easier in some places than it's
Yes, definitely.
That's a sign of engagement. Engagement is a sign of culture. It's a sign of, do I value this? Do I see this as important? I helped write some elements of the good practice guide around building a culture and getting people to embrace business continuity. And what we were focused on with that was about this concept of you're trying to move business continuity resilience from head to heart.
Yeah.
I want to do this. I believe it's important. And it's an ownership thing. And that, I think, is a really important element about this because that's what can help influence those that maybe aren't as interested, but also is where you get that influence of, I want to make this work. And that they become your stakeholders that actually can help you do implement these different programs.
So that has made me think of a question about employee engagement. Do you think that people, leaders, organisations use the term culture and employee engagement one, or do they use culture instead of employee engagement, or the other way around? Alison's smiling, Helen's thinking. I have a feeling there may be some answers to this question. Who would like to start on that one?
Very much me. I think that culture became a bit of a buzzword because employee engagement ceased to be cool or ceased to be a positive. In my previous career, I used to do exactly this. Employee engagement was my stock in trade. But it became a bit of a dirty word because it's just, look, why don't you just think the way that I want you to think? In some cases where people try to impose ideas, this notion of employee engagement, when in fact it's just new policies that you need to agree to. So yes, I do think that culture has sometimes been put over the top as a slightly softer, more pleasant sounding way of describing employee engagement as an activity. But that doesn't mean that it's bad. The best organizations are the ones where the leadership are role modeling that culture and they really live it and breathe it. That is how it was with employee engagement as well. I think the difference is that culture involves senior leaders more, whereas employee engagement is just telling people what to do by a slightly different name. And everyone who's a communication specialist is going to hate me now, but I recognize the trope.
Do you think, Alison, that employee engagement or the surveys that organisations use to assess employee engagement is a way of understanding culture and giving some definitive ways of saying, this is where we are, it might not be where we thought we were. So it helps leaders to know the real.
It's certainly doing cyber and security stuff. That's enormously important. The idea that people have a mechanism by which to tell you if there's something wrong or to describe how they feel about something. But again, the psychological safety element is a strong part of that. Are they able to say that without judgment? Are they able to say that safely? But also, and this is where the employee engagement thing actually is a real positive, is the idea that it has to be a circular conversation. So the difference between doing a once a year survey of 10 questions where you ask people how they are and doing a pulse survey every month where you ask them about a particular topic and then feedback on changes that are being made as a result of that survey. The other is lip service. And I think it's quite clear which is which. So I'm not saying there's no place for employee engagement at all. I'm just saying that it has to be acted upon. It has to be a conversation rather than a lecture.
Agreed. And I think that, again, is where I've seen really good examples of organisations that are engaging people and also focusing on the culture side as opposed to maybe some of the process side of the topics that we're looking at, because they are taking that opportunity to get feedback, but also provide that mechanism of, you told us something and this is what we've done about it.
Yes.
And really visible feedback loop. So yes, you're listening, but also these are
the tangible changes we're making.
Exactly. And it's also feeding back. You may have told us 3 things. These are 2 things we did something about. This is the one thing we haven't done something about, but this is why. So again, it's being very open, being very much about, we are listening. Yes. But that doesn't mean we're always going to do something about it.
Absolutely. That's about setting cultural norms. If those conversations become how you change culture, very much so.
Yeah. So here's another question. What is the difference between the types of culture? So is there or are there different types of culture? So resilience, we talk about cyber culture, we talk about culture and resilience, culture, business continuity, all of those. And you've been talking about other types of culture. Do you think, no, open question, is there or are there different types of culture? Alison or Helen, I know you have thoughts on this.
I think it's wrong to say they're different cultures. I think it's better to refer to them as different facets of a culture. So treat it like a diamond, if you will. Each face has a slightly different influence. An organisational culture is made up of many different parts, of which attitudes to resilience, behaviours around security, though they become part of the overall organisational culture. I think sometimes people become a little bit obsessed with one of the sub-pieces. In cybersecurity, there's a lot of push around this at the moment, the idea that you must build a strong security culture. It's important that people understand security, that they implement it, they feel ownership of it, like you were saying, Helen, that they feel like it's part of their role, part of the DNA of what they do at the company. But if the direction that takes veers away from the cultural norm of the company, then it's not going to succeed. Trying to build a security culture that isn't aligned with the culture of the business isn't going to succeed. I think thinking of them as independent entities is a mistake, but they all have an element to do with each other. Would you agree with that, Helen?
Oh, I would. And as you were saying that, I was thinking that's the concept of when I talk about it. You need to understand the culture to then develop a program that fits with it. An organization has a culture, it has attitudes, beliefs, all of these elements that are generally set by leadership at different levels. If we want to be successful in implementing the programs we're talking about, whether it's cybersecurity, resilience, business continuity, crisis, any of those, and this is how I talk about it when I do talk to people about this topic. I'm coming in because I'm a resilience professional, I'm talking about this, but I'm also saying anything you do with an organization that's around change and influence, you need to do it in line with the organization, and you need to do it in a way that is going to suit that organization as it changes and grows and its culture changes, because that to me is a big part of understanding culture. It's not a point in time. You know, if you come into an organization, and I've done that many times, implementing business continuity and resilience, just by me coming in, it's going to make little ripples that will change things. So even one person can make that change, never mind all the other people that you're touching, because that's how these programs work. You know, we go in as an individual or as a group of individuals, and we start talking about certain things. We start using certain terminology. We start talking about certain concepts. So we start a new language to some extent, all of which influences and changes it to different extents, obviously, because certain parts of the organization will adopt that and certain parts of the organization will be less receptive to that. But that's a really important part about this. And I think back to your question, it's not about what's the program you're trying to implement. It's about understanding how to make that change happen and how we can best talk about discipline to influence and to get people to, again, back to that, I want to do this. I believe it's something that's important to make the organisation safe. All of the facade of what we do, that's all we're trying to do, is make organisations safe. We have different things that we're focused on, but we're just trying to make organisations and people safe as they work. And that's what we should be focused on. How safe do you feel to talk about problems? Do you feel like your challenges and your questions are listened to? Do you feel like you get sort of validation or feedback? And that's the bits that I think is important to talk about when we as practitioners talk about influencing culture. It's those elements that we want to be trying to understand, and those are the elements that we want to influence and change.
Definitely. I think it's one of the reasons that one of the first questions I often ask as a consultant coming to organisations, either after they've done a resilience exercise or because they're about to do a resilience exercise and they want to be prepared, which makes complete sense. Obviously, one of the first things that comes up for me is, what's your learning strategy? Do these people have an in-house learning department? Do they run courses? Are they once a year to tick a box? Are they cumulative? Are they micro-learning? What people's attitudes to... I think certain businesses I've worked with recently refer to it as a growth mindset, or I think Microsoft refers to it as a learn-it-all mindset rather than a know-it-all mindset, which I quite like. But yeah, because the change requires you to learn something or to unlearn something bad, which is often harder. I think that really does come into it as well.
I really like that kind of willingness to learn is a really important point. Because again, I think that's a big part of any of these programs working, or again, any program you're trying to implement in an organization, because it is going to be slightly different.
Whether they have time to learn, whether they have permission to learn, all those things.
Which is back to a really important question. How much time do you give to learning? Because if you're not bought into it now, then that's going to make this a much harder process.
Yeah.
And it's not to say it's not possible, but we all would inwardly sigh at that point, because we'd be like, oh, okay, this is going to be really hard, because you're not really bought into how to run a good organisation.
And that is a culture question right there, bringing it all the way back.
Nicely done. So before we wrap up, would you two like to leave listeners with one takeaway or a core message, whichever you would like to do? Alison, I'm going to come to you first.
Alignment piece. That if you're going in to do a piece of work around resilience or cyber or anything like that, any parts of the business that are trying to make the business safer, it has to align with the business goals. It has to align with the leadership belief system. It has to align with the company culture. Because if you try to move in a different direction, as soon as you've departed, it will snap back to how it was before, no matter how much work you put in. So and learning what the business is, what the culture of that organization is first, and then developing your activities so they align, or at least try to move it a little bit, just nudge it slightly, rather than trying to do something that's wholesalely unrecognizable to the culture of the organization. That will lead to failure. So be aligned, learn and listen before you make pronouncements. Okay, let's go with that.
Yeah. I always think of that as like water, trying to change the course of water. You're trying to put a dam up, or you're just trying to nudge it slowly. I always think of people like water. They will go where they want to, and organisations will be the same, cultures the same.
I've got an image of the evergreen in the Panama Canal with the tiny tiger and the people with the shovels.
Unintentionally, but I'm moving on, Helen.
Not the canals, but everything you just said, I 100% agree with. Give yourself time to do that. Don't feel rushed to do things. I often say that to people. If you're in an organisation, everyone's like, so when are we going to do this business continuity? When are we going to do this cyber security? Particularly if you're new to an organisation or new to a role and need the time. And some organisations are really good at that. Some give you the grace, but if they don't, you need to create that space. And alongside that, particularly if you're new, find your people that can help you with that. Those are the two things that I always say for people. It's like learning the business, but giving yourself space. Then get a stakeholder group of people who can tell you, why didn't it work last time? Because chances are they've tried this before. What was done? And how can you use that to adapt your approach so that it might be more successful? And to your point, it starts to move people very slowly. It takes time. This is not something that you're going to achieve within the first year. It could take a long time, and you will have many other changes around that will then reframe what you're trying to do. I'm going to stop, because otherwise I could keep going, and it's meant to be succinct.
That's okay. We can always have another podcast on some of these points. So nudge theory could be another podcast, because we all love nudge theory.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Alison, thank you. Now, where can people find out more about what you do and connect with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, or I also have my own business website at buildsecurethinking.com.
Thank you very much. And Helen, thank you for being a guest on your own show. Where can people find you and find out more about what you do?
The best place is LinkedIn. I have my own page that I post on, and my business page, which is Resilience Continuity Consulting within LinkedIn. Sign up to the podcast. You'll get lots more insights from that as well.
And we'll put both of those connections on this podcast as well. Thank you so much for me today on The Prepared Leader. If you found this valuable, please follow, rate or share the episode with someone who's leading through change right now. Until next time, stay ready, stay resilient.